when you raise outside capital, it comes with some strings attached. It comes with having to please others and conform your business. So the opportunity in itself is a way of helping determine how much risk you can take and how much capital of your own that you can put into the business. The goal, in my mind, with especially with a resource-constrained startup, the goal is to get to the first dollar of revenue. So what this validation process does, even interviewing 20 people, will limit the number of pivots that a startup needs to make. And every pivot is so expensive.
Okay, welcome Jim Semick, the co-founder of Product Plan, which is a leading project management software platform, also an angel investor and a mentor here at UCSB's new venture program. Jim, so good to see you. Local Santa Barbara. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited. We connected years ago and have sort of stayed in touch along the way. And I'm excited to learn more about your journey because I think you've had a fascinating one and one that entrepreneurs can learn a lot of lessons from in a good way. So excited to chat. So let's dive right in. I want to hear about Product Plan and all that stuff. But I think top of mind for obviously people listening to this podcast is raising money. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think is so important is determining upfront why you're raising money, who are you going to raise money from, and do you really need to raise money? Is that the path you want to go down? So if you don't mind, let's dive in and just talk about how you decided to bootstrap and what that kind of looked like in the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I started a company about 10 years ago. I have a co-founder, Greg Goodman, and I decided to start a B2B SaaS business, so a web-based software business, because both of us have had experience with that in the past. Both of us came from a product management background and have had success in the past launching software products, and have been part of venture-backed companies previously. So I, prior to starting a company, was an early employee at a B2B SaaS business called AppFolio, based here in Santa Barbara. And that company raised several $1 million through venture funding because it was a large problem that we were solving. It was property management software. So we were going to disrupt the property management software space. And fast forward to today, that company is $6 or $7 billion business, generating hundreds of millions of revenue annually, and a publicly traded company. So a very successful venture. And we recognized early on that the size of the opportunity and the competitors that were in the space required that we raise capital. And so I've seen the benefits of raising money, the benefits of raising institutional capital early on in a business and having that so a business has significant runway in order to get through some of the competitive hurdles in order to bring a really excellent product to market. And when it came time to start my own software business, my co-founder and I spent a lot of time together before we started the business to understand what we personally wanted out of the business. What were the reasons we were starting the business? What did we want to achieve out of it financially and lifestyle-wise? And we concluded that we wanted to start something that was smaller. We wanted to develop a niche product that we could enter into the market very quickly and build a business without having the overhead of venture funding, seed funding and venture funding. So, and that was a very conscious decision on our part because we realized through our experience that when you raise outside capital, it comes with some strings attached. It comes with having to please others and conform your business to others. So obviously, an investor wants to get a return out of the business. And so they're going to be looking at the business very closely. You need to make sure and give them regular updates. They often have a strategic if they have, especially if they have a seat on the board, they have a strategic goal in mind. And so your outcome as a founder, as an entrepreneur, is very closely aligned with what they want to achieve, which is often a 10x return on their investment. And so we decided that we wanted to get into a software business that was smaller. We wanted to work with people that we enjoyed working with. We wanted to have a flexible enough lifestyle as we built the business that we weren't, working these 80-hour weeks. And so it was a conscious decision on our part. And even though my co-founder and I have had previous success with other businesses, we decided that even though we could have access to money, we decided to not go down that path. And so that was a strategic decision that we made early on, well before we started the business. And so that, in a sense, constrained us. It constrained our thinking about what kind of business to build. And as we went through our market validation process and evaluated different business opportunities, we found opportunities that would require a significant investment. And for that reason, we backed away from those opportunities and continued to figure out through validation another opportunity that was more easily manageable for us. And I will add that my co-founder and I, because of our previous successes, we had a little bit of funding that we could put into the business. So we could self-fund it to get off the ground. And I can go into that a little more.
That's amazing. And real quick to back up, did you guys work together previously?
We had known each other through our local entrepreneurial community. We had actually been mentors together with another startup in town. And so we had gotten to know each other a little bit. And then through this process of paddleboarding together, going on hikes together, we became friends and decided that we would be good co-founders together.
Very cool. And did you, in your years leading up to that, did you have this feeling like you always wanted to have your own company? Or, because I love the idea of, I think you have a lot of young people. There's nothing wrong with going out, working, making some money, getting, a little bit of stability there, and then starting a business. I think there's a million different ways it can go, right? But yeah, was that just kind of always in the pit of your stomach, like you want to have your own? Yeah.
Always. And I've had other consulting businesses. Early in my career, I developed training books for Microsoft. And as part of that, I hired people to help me develop these training books. So I hired writers, editors, indexers, people like that who had specialties, graphic designers who could help me put together these books. And so I have run my own businesses in the past. However, I had always wanted to start my own product-based company. And I've wanted to ever since I was a kid. I've always had an entrepreneurial side of me. And so it's always been part of my expectation for myself that I would do this myself and launch something myself. And having worked in other startups for years, I saw how it's done. And that gave me increased confidence to eventually do it myself.
Very cool. And so I think in doing this podcast, I've come across actually quite a few people who I think technically are in the position to self-fund possibly more than they think. Where did you guys land in terms of how much personal risk you were willing to take to do this? Like, talk us through that a little bit of how do you evaluate, is it worth self-funding and taking that risk, or is it worth taking on the risk of investors and potentially being led down a path I don't want to go down? Because that's tricky. Talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Sure. It depends a lot on the opportunity. So the opportunity in itself is a way of helping determine how much risk you can take and how much capital of your own that you can put into the business. And the way that I mitigate that risk is through market validation. So I have a process that I've used for several companies now and several products where I interview potential customers to identify a problem and potentially pre-sell a product before it exists. And so that process reduces the risk significantly. So I understand what the pitfalls are, and I have a decent understanding of if this is going to fail, why is it going to fail? And then how do we mitigate that risk? So, and in our case, we chose a niche market that was constrained, and we had a fairly good idea that we would be able to get to market without building a product that takes years. And we could get to market by addressing a market that was fairly constrained and knowable. So our market was product managers in companies. So product managers are those people in pretty much every company, whether it's a brick and mortar company or a hospitality company or a software company that helps determine what to build from a digital perspective. So every company has a website. So imagine Amazon. Amazon has probably hundreds and hundreds of these product managers who are responsible for different components of a website, or a product like Spotify. Spotify requires product managers to help create the strategy. And so through our market validation process, we identified a problem that product managers have with their communication of their strategy to internal stakeholders. So executives at companies, for example, at Spotify, want to know what product is going to be launched, what new features are going to be added to their mobile apps, for example. So we decided that this is a niche enough product that we could get to market quickly, that we didn't have a significant amount of marketing that needed to be done, costly marketing that needed to be done. And so we had developed budgets well ahead of time about if we launch this product, this is our best guess on what the sales are going to be, what our expenses are going to be, our hiring plan. And we decided that this is small enough and we could limit the amount of capital that we put in personally. It was enough that the amount was significant to us, but it was low enough that we didn't feel we needed outside angel investors to participate in order to give us the runway that we needed. And I can come back and talk about the cons of that. There are some negative aspects to bootstrapping. There are some things that we gave up on as a result of making those decisions.
Let's hear it. Yeah, go for it. I think that's good stuff to hear. Yeah.
Well, as a startup, you are resource constrained. You don't know what the right decisions are, and there are 1,000 decisions to make when you're building a company. 1,000 decisions about what your product is going to have, the minimum viable product that you're going to market with, the pricing, how to connect with potential customers. And so there are an unlimited number of potential things that a company that has raised money might not have to wrestle with them as much. And I'll give you an example. We had done our market validation, and we had launched a website to reach potential customers. And this was before we built a product. So this website announced a beta product or a preview product. And we purchased some Google ads, we purchased some LinkedIn ads, and we drove traffic to this website. And the messaging on the website conformed with what we were hearing in our interviews, with our customer interviews. So it used the same language. And we weren't sure what sort of response we would get. And when people started signing up for this preview product, we knew at that point that we had something. When people at large corporations were willing to give us their corporate email address, we knew that we had something. And so we would call these people and we would say, we're building this product. We would love to have your input. We want to make this the best product for you. And we'd love to have your insight. And so through that process, we decided, okay, we're good to go. We've reduced our risk enough. We have enough information, not perfect information, but we have enough to make a decision that we're going to build this product. And then the time came to hire someone to help us build the product. Both my co-founder and I, I'm not particularly technical. My co-founder is definitely more technical than I am, but neither one of us are developers. And so we had to hire our first developer. Well, when you're bootstrapped, that becomes a very difficult choice right there, because we interviewed people who wanted market rate as a software developer. And as a bootstrap company, we can't afford market rate. And so we had to be very scrappy in who we hired and how we paid that person to get us off the ground. And if we had taken venture funding, if we had taken angel funding, that decision would not have been as hard. We would have hired someone faster. We would have been able to pay maybe not market rate, but something closer to market rate. We would have been able to grant equity as part of the package. And it would have been, I think, an easier time, and we would have gotten to our first beta product faster if we had taken outside money. But what we did instead was we did something very scrappy, where we hired someone who wasn't a quote unquote professional programmer, someone who is very talented, someone who is very creative. And we decided to pay them half cash and half equity. And so we came up with a model where, and for your listeners, the model that we used is something called Slicing the Pie. And it's a really great ebook and model that entrepreneurs can use to help determine how much to pay someone, both in terms of cash and equity, in order to make it fair and not give away a large part of your company. And so we used that model to hire our first people. And for those early people, when an exit eventually came, which was a couple of years ago, we had a partial buyout by a private equity firm. Those early employees saw the fruit of that risk that they took early on, and so it wound up being a good gamble for them, and although deferred for many years. And so it's those are the sorts of trade-offs that an early stage company that's bootstrapped needs to make. We also didn't have much money for marketing, so we had to be very deliberate in what we used for Google AdWords and how we went about our acquisition model. And luckily, we concluded really early on that our acquisition model could be a content-based acquisition model. So, and so we set out really early on to build content and blog posts, ebooks. We conducted webinars, things like that are, to us, very low cost. It didn't require a lot of capital for me to write blog articles, for example. And that paid off. And so today the company's website gets millions and millions of visits per year, in large part to the early work that we did to develop this content marketing strategy, which was a low cost method. And it's definitely lower cost than, for example, having only Google AdWords as an acquisition model. It's definitely lower cost than paying some high-priced influencer to promote a product. And so we use that method, and that aligned very well with a bootstrapped company.
Yeah, the content strategy might be different, but still so relevant to just give value, upfront, draw people in, and then educate them on the product. So what was the time frame approximately from when you guys started to like when you actually started, charging customers? Yeah.
The goal in my mind with especially with a resource-constrained startup, the goal is to get to the first dollar of revenue. And so that was our driving factor. The market validation took about 9 months. And that was my co-founder and I coming up with different ideas that might fit our model, and validating those ideas with potential customers. And we came very close to launching a business that was completely different. And yes, we thought for a while, and we validated that there was an opportunity in the home healthcare space in developing software for home healthcare providers. And it probably still is a great opportunity today. It just wasn't the right opportunity for us because as we were developing this, there were two points where we said, I'm not sure this is the right thing for us. And one of them was, were we passionate about the product and the market itself? And we looked at each other and said, are we really passionate about the home healthcare space, senior management? And we said, no. And then the other factor that eventually played into our decision to move on to other opportunities was that we realized that the product depth that we would need and the amount of product was so significant that we would probably need outside funding in order to get to market. So it was about 9 months of figuring out that market, figuring out a couple of other markets. We looked at the legal space. And then I started calling some product management friends of mine and said, tell me about some of your challenges. And I had a different idea. And my idea was, I would tell them my idea and they said, that's good. And that's interesting, but my real problem is this other thing.
Oh, wow.
And so we started listening to that and we pivoted our pitch and we started pitching product roadmap software. So a way of communicating a product strategy. And people said things like, oh, you were in my last meeting, weren't you? Or they would say, I've been looking for something like this. Or I've tried to do this myself, but it takes me hours every week to do it. And so when we started hearing that, the market validation went very quickly. Once we started hearing the right response from potential customers, we said, okay, we're on to something. And we interviewed about 30 people in total. And these are in-depth interviews. These are at least 45-minute interviews to really understand deeply the problem that they're facing, how a potential solution would add value to their day, that sort of thing. And then we launched this website that I mentioned, that we drove traffic to the website. And so from beginning to end of validating this particular product and problem, it was about 3 months. So about 3 months from identifying something that really resonated to saying, okay, we're going to pull the trigger on this. And then once we started coding, it was 6 months until we got a beta product and started charging for that beta product.
Wow.
And this was a small team. This was, in the beginning, it was my co-founder and I and a developer. And so we were able to really constrain the product feature set so that we could get to market and get to that first dollar very quickly. And it was fun. It was scary, especially when I called these people that were testing our product and I said, it's time for you to give us your credit card. and then they did. And then we were off to the races.
Wow. And were you guys working during that time, or had you guys left your jobs and you were like, I'm going to give this 100%?
Yeah, for me, I was working at the time. I was consulting, and I was able to reduce my consulting hours and still kept money coming in. I had kids in school and a mortgage to pay and all of that, and then gave about half my time to the startup. And then after we went to market, we said, okay, we're going to go full time. So we decided to go full time at that point. And full time meaning we're not taking a salary. In the beginning, there was no salary. And then over time, we gave ourselves something to, help offset the long hours that we were putting in. And there were really early mornings and really late nights figuring this thing out. And Yeah. And then eventually over time, I wouldn't say that we ever paid ourselves a true market rate. And that's another downside of not taking institutional money, is that regardless of what funding source a startup has, everyone is taking less than market rate. Right, that's just part of it. It's part of the commitment. It's part of recognizing the resources that you have. You in a startup, you really want to put money towards the product. You want to put money towards acquisition, and knowing that you're taking a big risk, and then one day that risk may pay off.
Yep. No, that's amazing. So one of the things I think that is challenging in any startup, but never mind if you're bootstrapping, is managing your finances, right? To make sure, because it can be really scary to take that first paycheck and go, are we sure we can do this? Are we sure we're ready? Who was managing the finances, and any advice you have for entrepreneurs who do want to bootstrap and how to, you should be doing this no matter what in a startup, like tracking your finances daily and being heavily involved, I believe. But talk to us a little bit about how you guys manage that, because I think that's one of the trickiest things to bootstrap for that long. You guys had to be really on top of your finances, I would think, down to a microscopic level.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, luckily, my co-founder and I have different skill sets. So I'm on more of the business and marketing and sales side. That's where my aptitude is. And Greg is more technical, more operational. And so in the beginning, we shared everything. And in a startup, you're doing everything, putting together the desks, pretty much everything, responding to customer complaints. And so we shared a lot of that load. I developed a budget early on. And fortunately, that budget held true for a couple of years, which was, really validating. And so we divided a lot of this up. And so my co-founder took on a lot of the bookkeeping and accounting side of things. And then after about a year, we got a bookkeeper to take care of the finance side of things. So, and to your point, it is absolutely important to monitor every penny. And the other thing I'll mention is that things always take longer and cost more than we expect. And so no way can we get to, almost zero in the bank account, hoping that the next sale is going to come in. We can't get to that point. Now, fortunately for us, we had that revenue almost right away. So as soon as we came out of beta after that 6-month period, we started getting sales initially from the early customers, those early beta testers. And then we started getting sales from people we didn't know. And then we could take that money and we could reinvest it in customer acquisition. So we can keep the flywheel going through that method. And so after a while, our business was at break even. Even though we were growing, we're at break even. And so we knew how much money we had to work with during any given month. And for us, it was a software as a service business, so subscription-based business. And once we developed a subscription-based business, we could predict with reasonable certainty what the next few months would be holding based on our growth rate, based on what we were seeing. So, so that gave us some confidence that we could be spending, eventually give ourselves a little bit of a paycheck, and so on. But the growth was, in the beginning, was slow, and slower than what you might find with a venture-backed company. A venture-backed company that could hire a VP of marketing, somebody that you can hire, a company where you could hire SEO, where you could really invest in AdWords and invest in other marketing channels. So we didn't have that.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one of the tricky things too is your mindset when you're not taking a salary for that long. can be
Absolutely.
challenging, right? And it can feel like, am I crazy? Am I the only one doing this? Like, what am I doing? And I think that's one thing that doesn't get talked about as much is how challenging that can be at times, right? So I would imagine having a co-founder helps with that because you guys are kind of in it together.
Yes.
But, were you just in those moments? Is it just you guys had your end goal and you knew you were on track? Like, what do you recommend to people who are kind of in that place right now where they're bootstrapping? Maybe they do need to raise money, but they're not paying themselves. And it's just that constant, like, should I keep going? Should I keep doing this? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, it is stressful. No question about it. Even though we were experiencing success in the beginning, we were experiencing sales, it's still very stressful. You don't know what the future holds. And so you mentioned having a co-founder. I have been very lucky. I've been very lucky to have such a great co-founder to bounce things off of. We can talk each other off of ledges. We can bounce decisions off of each other. We can both look at the money and the budget and all of this, the bank account, and we can say, okay, what do we want to do here? Where do we want to invest? And so I for those in your audience who are considering starting a company, having a co-founder and one that has complementary skills is invaluable. Really, really important. But it is stressful regardless. And I will add that the stress is, for me, almost part of the fun, because you're being challenged, your skill sets are being challenged. I had to learn new things along the way, and that's part of the fun. And of course, now I can look back on that during this time after having achieved success and an exit. I can look back on it and say it was all worth it. But there were absolutely times that were stressful.
Just embrace it.
It's part of the ride.
Part of the ride. Everyone goes through it. Yeah. I think that's important to realize. So I think you say you were lucky to find a good co-founder, but I think you were also very deliberate in how you went about this, right? And I think that's something I did kind of the opposite of just like, I have an idea and dove in head first with like, knew I wanted to have my own company someday, knew I wanted to start a business, but gave zero thought to what would be the smartest path, to go about this. So I think there's so much to be said for being deliberate in the very beginning, thinking through to the end, thinking through like personal lifestyle and values and all that stuff, finding somebody that matched that, right? So important versus just like, here's my BFF or cousin, and we're just going to jump into business together. So I think, being deliberate has a lot of value, and putting the time and effort into those things up front, obviously makes a big difference.
If I could add, having the conversations, these hard conversations. I knew that Greg and I had similar values. I knew that we had these complementary skill sets. I knew that we could have conversations. And then there are the additional things that sometimes founders don't talk about. Things like, what happens if one of us, we've started a company, and then one of us says, this isn't right for me, and I'm going to go get a job, right? So it often issues of equity come into play, fairness, what feels fair to each other. And so it's important to have those conversations up front about what does this look like and what happens if, what are the expectations? How much time are we going to put into this? Can one of us have a moonlight? Can one of us have a side job? Those sorts of things. Very important, because those are the sticky things that come up when the going gets really tough. Those sticky things come up and can actually break up a startup, break up founders and break up startups. And having those things documented early on, really, really important when it comes time for a potential exit or for managing through difficult times.
And it's so easy to not have those conversations, right?
It is.
You get excited, you're having fun.
It's easier to assume that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay, so real quick, let's talk about, I want to hear the tipping point when you did decide to go get funding and how you went about that. And then I want to hear kind of what you're, as an angel investor now, with all that experience, what you're looking for in entrepreneurs. But the tipping point, so you guys had a growth opportunity, it sounds like. What was that conversation like? Okay, we're ready to go get money. And then how did you go about getting that first round?
Yeah.
Or that round, I guess.
Yeah, so we had been in the business and working at it for about 8 years, and at that point we had hired a CEO to take over, and had built the company up to 80 plus employees at that point, which exceeded our original expectations. And so the company had grown. We also saw that there was an even bigger market opportunity than we expected. And we made the decision that we needed capital after 8 years in order to fend off competition and in order to really seize on the opportunity that was in front of us. So during the time that we had built the company, product management became a very popular job, and product management software became a little bit of a boom. And and that was not the case when we first started the company. And so we decided, okay, to really seize on this opportunity, we need to find an equity partner. And as part of that process, we made the decision that we would also like to take a few chips off the table. So our equity was worth something at that point. And so we decided to work with a private equity firm in order to do two things. One, to realize some of the value that we had built in the company. So we could personally realize that, as well as our employees, especially those who were with us from the early days. And then as part of that, to get a growth equity round. So we raised several $1 million in order to really jump on the opportunity that was in front of the company. And so that was kind of a natural decision. We had been in the business for a number of years. While we were still really enjoying ourselves, we realized that it was time. It was time for that. And so everything aligned for us from that decision perspective. And I wouldn't say that it was a no-brainer, because there's a lot of work that goes into raising the money. There's a lot of work with doing a recap, is what they call it, an equity recap. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And so we spent many, many months on that. So that's a trade-off. We could have continued to work in the business, in building the business, or we could take our time and work on these potential relationships, and eventually working with a private equity firm in order to grow the company. And so that decision wasn't. We all had to be on board at that point. We had. The board had grown. The board was originally my co-founder and I, and then we had added the CEO, and then we had added 2 outside board members to it, to the board, for decision making on things like this. And so we all had to come into agreement that this was the right thing to do for the company. And so we made that decision, and it took a while for it to happen, and eventually we raised the money, and it was the right thing to do.
What was the point of hiring the CEO? Because it sounds like that companies typically don't do that early on. A lot of times, maybe in software they do. I come from more of a consumer products background, but because I think that obviously can add so much value, right? To bring in someone experienced. What pushed that decision, and how did you decide on someone to hire, and how much do you think that influenced like future growth? And
Yeah, yeah, these decisions aren't obvious, but we recognize the signs of needing to bring in an outside CEO, someone who had some previous experience. And it was about 6 years into our journey. And at that point, my co-founder was playing the role of CEO. And we both realized that we needed someone with a fresh perspective to come in. Someone that wasn't as invested emotionally in the business. And it's a difficult decision too, because we had grown this thing to a decent sized company with a great culture. We really enjoyed working with everyone. People really enjoyed working with us. We had a unique culture, and we're based in Santa Barbara. We had a really cool office space in town, close to the beach, and we had built up the really fun culture of beach events and things like that. And so the decision to bring in somebody who wasn't part of that culture was a difficult one, but we knew it was the right decision. And then came time to compensate them. And so when you hire an outside CEO, you have to make a difficult decision about compensation. What is a fair market value for the skill set that they're going to bring in, and then what's a fair equity compensation. And so that was all part of it. It was all part of the decision making, and it really accelerated our growth, bringing in someone from the outside who had a management background, someone who could hire people, hire a high-performing executive team. It became a natural next step for us. So, and I can't remember exactly how many employees we had at the point, but I would say somewhere between 40 and 50 employees. And at that point, managing a company of that size starts to become more difficult, right? You have all the hiring that needs to be done. And we were involved in pretty much every hiring decision at that point. And we also, there's a natural, at that point, a need for hiring professional HR, professional people management. And so it just became a natural for us to hire an outside person. But from an entrepreneur standpoint, it is a difficult decision because this is your baby, right? We knew every piece of the business. We knew every person in the company so well. We knew about their lives. We knew all about all their side hobbies, and it was a really close-knit, fun group. And so when you hire a CEO, it's impossible for co-founders to be co-CEOs of that company. And so we had to deliberately give up some decision making. We had to move our decision making to more of a board level decision making. The day-to-day things that we were so involved in, we had to let that go, and that was hard.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, exactly, because who knows the business better than we do?
Yeah, crazy, very cool. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of smart decisions along the way where you guys didn't let ego get in the way. I feel like that's like a common theme from the very beginning of we don't know best. We're going to talk to our customers, see what they want, right? That's like a very putting your ego aside. Bootstrapping, not falling, not victim, but to I got to go raise money. I got to make this as big as possible, go big or go home. And then to bring in a CEO. So, I mean, those are a series of decisions where you guys both put your egos aside, it seems, and really thought, what's the best thing for our vision? which is amazing. I mean, that's not easy to do. I think entrepreneurs are very excited, and that can be difficult to do, to put your ego aside. So huge props there.
Sure. Thank
So
you for
what-
recognizing that, Jayla.
Yeah. So what are you guys like? I love that you're bringing all this experience to UCSB. I love that they have a new venture program. I'm obviously, went to UCSB, my undergrad. You're an angel investor now. You've got all this amazing experience. You've seen it's possible to bootstrap a company. Given, I do think consumer products can be different from software, and obviously there's all kinds of variables. But what do you look for now in entrepreneurs if you're going to do an angel investment? What would you say are some of the just few things that are critical to you?
Yeah. Well, number one for me is identification of a big enough problem. That for me is number one. Can an entrepreneur actually explain what a customer's problem is? And then can they explain the value of solving that problem? That right there is very important. And then have they conducted some kind of validation? And the validation can be either through customer interviews or, more commonly, and what I look for is some kind of traction. So have the first customers been acquired, and are they using some kind of a product? And are they deriving value from that? And that validation can be either they're using a product and they're paying for a product. It could be some sort of letter of intent that they've signed. It's some kind of validation. So those are elements that I begin to look for, and then I look for team characteristics. So I look for experience. Has someone on the team, have they done it before? That becomes a very important thing. Or have they built enough domain expertise in a particular area that they really, really understand the market? And so those are some of the elements that I look for. And then does the business model make sense? The many entrepreneurs, and especially those that I mentor, teams out of UCSB, they start with a really cool product in mind. So that's where the starting point is. And lately I've been hearing a lot of AI ideas, of course. And often they will start with the product. I have a cool idea for a product that's going to do this and this. And for me, that product is only a fraction of what the business is. So the business is, are you solving enough of a problem, a big enough problem that's high enough on a customer's priority list? That's very important. And then are we solving a problem that has has a value proposition that can be quantified? So this is especially true in business products. It's less true in consumer products, especially those that have some sort of a value. And for example, a dating app, right? There may be a business model around it that might generate revenue, but the value proposition for the customer is something that's a little more intangible, but it's a large priority for many people. Yeah. So, and so I look for entrepreneurs that identify the problem, and they can quantify what the value is of solving that problem. And then they have an understanding of the business model around it. They have an understanding of their cost structure. They may not know for sure and have it all dialed in, but they at least have a pretty decent guess of what that is. Then they also should have an idea of the revenue model, of course. So those are the elements that I look for. Got
it. Very cool. Amazing. And in terms of like ducks in a row, are you looking for like polished decks, or, how much, no, you're just like, give me the meat and potatoes of what's going on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In fact, the last one I invested in, there was no deck. After the fact, they came up with a deck, but I was already sold on it before they developed a deck.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and partly because they're people who have had experience. They've built companies before, and that speaks volumes, right? I know that if you put really talented people with experience into really any domain, they can figure it out. They can figure out what the problem is. They can figure out how to monetize it. And then for those that have developed decks, I don't, the quality of the deck, obviously I want to not see typos and things like that, but the quality of the deck is really secondary to, have you thought this through?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
That is
and
the
that
most
validation. Yeah, because validation can, speaks 1,000 words right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. Amazing. Well, anything else you'd like to share? Anything we skipped? I could ask you like a million more questions, but I know we're coming up on an hour here.
Yeah. The thing that I would leave people with is this idea of validation. And what that means is interviewing potential customers, which means that you first identify a very specific customer segment. That is so important, to be able to be specific about who it is that you would potentially sell to, and then figuring out how to reach those people. That is a learning exercise right there. How do you reach out to these people? How do you talk with them? How do you get them to respond? What messaging do you use? What objections do they give you? And then being open-minded enough to hear those objections and then challenge them politely yields so much value. And if a company is going to raise a small seed round or be bootstrapped, this is so important, because one of the killers of startups is they get excited, they build a product, a lot of it is their idea, and they get to market, and then it doesn't sell like they expected. And so what this validation process does, even interviewing 20 people, will limit the number of pivots that a startup needs to make. And every pivot is so expensive.
Yeah.
Right? If you spend a couple of months building a product and you throw it out there and then people don't buy, you've limited your runway right there. And so the closer you can get to maybe not certainty, but the more risk that you can reduce, the more runway a startup will have and the more successful they'll be.
So are you still part of Product Plan today, or have you guys completely exited?
I am. No, I'm on the board.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, it's amazing. I think what a great story, what a great example of how it can be done differently, right? It can be done. It doesn't have to be the traditional route that you hear about the companies in the media because it's exciting to report on companies raising money. Of course, they don't report on when those companies go out of business necessarily, unless they're huge. So I think the more people can hear that there are other paths to success that are oftentimes even more sustainable is so important. So I really appreciate you sharing all that info. Where can people learn more about you and get in touch with you if you're open to that?
Yeah, I'm absolutely open to it. They can find me at jimsemick.com, and people are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much, Jim. So appreciate it. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Jayla.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.